through the generous bequest of the Nobel Foundation and Robert H. Hinckley. The Institute is dedicated to teaching students respect for practical politics and the principle of citizen involvement in government. The Hinckley Institute also offers paid internships to students of all 85 countries around the globe. The Hinckley Institute offers in D.C. and over $70,000 in academic scholarships. We invite students to go next door or to our website, www.hinckley.utah.edu, for more information. Transatlantic relations, the Czech perspective. Our guest today is Petr Gandalovic. Petr Gandalovic assumed his responsibilities as ambassador of the Czech Republic to the United States on May 20th, 2011. Gandalovic previously served as a member of the Chamber of Deputies in the Czech Parliament from 2006 to 2011, during which time he was a member of the Foreign Committee and a member of the Agriculture Committee. He was also the mayor of the city of Ústí nad Labem, the Czech Minister of Agriculture and Minister of Regional Development, as well as Consul General of the Czech Republic in New York. In addition, Gandalovic served as Minister Advisor from 1994 to 1995 and Director of the Economic and Information Section at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Environment. Please join me in welcoming
students, faculty, dear ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wish to thank the Hinckley Institute for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about such an important topic as a transatlantic relationship, and I will make my best efforts to convince you, maybe there is no need to convincing you, that the transatlantic relationship is still very important, and I will use the Czech Republic as a small country in the center of Europe. Introduce to you to my colleagues, Michal Sedláček, that also covers city. So I will try to make my opening remarks for your questions, and I think that it's much better that you will lead the transatlantic relationship. This is such a mantra. Everybody talks about transatlantic relationship, but these days it seems like on both sides of the Atlantic the willingness to do something for it and to maybe even make sacrifices for that bond have weakened. Why is that? Of course, that is a logical result of both long time we have lived in peace, so people may think that those crises which brought America at the help to Europe are over and they won't happen again. And also the economic crisis that hit both of the sides of the Atlantic led the peoples of Europe and in America to concentrate on their own business and not thinking of the importance of cooperation and shared responsibility between the two sides. Also, economically, the United States and Europe have always think of themselves rather as competitors than as some sort of shared or common market. You have established a free trade zone with Mexico and Canada. Just recently you even closed free trade zones with Panama, Colombia and South Korea. And where's Europe? And on the other hand, Europe, of course, the European Union has its own economic ambitions. And yet we see many other new economic powers emerging in many parts of the world, and it's not only Asia, it's of course Latin Africa. So we no longer should think of ourselves in our economic strength, the tone, the economic development in the world. But before I will talk about the economy, let's talk about be something little weakened in people's minds. People no longer wish to sacrifice lives of their native, of their countrymen. They no longer wish to sacrifice big amounts of taxpayers' money for security. It's not that maybe not such a problem in the United States, even though, of course, the sequester and other budgetary cuts have also had a difficult impact on your national security. But at the same time, in Europe, we see that none of the European Union members, except two, Poland and Greece, are in compliance with our own commitment to set aside 2% of GDP for national defense. And again, why is that? This is for one part the reason of some sort of complacency that we no longer are threatened from the outside. And from the other point of view, obviously, Europe's been going through a very, very difficult era of economic crisis, and I would even say structural crisis. So the Czech Republic, as a new member of the European Union, we will just celebrate 10 years anniversary of our entry to European Union in May, and also coincidentally we will around the same time celebrate the 15th year anniversary of our entry to NATO. So here you see that our entry to NATO was actually 5 years earlier than our entry to the European Union. And it might be a little symbolic thing that we really saw the necessity to integrate into NATO, into this civilization and security important system, rather than integrating ourselves in, because we always regarded ourselves a European country, so we didn't see that much of a necessity to declare that we belong to Europe, because we are in the center of Europe. But integrating ourselves to NATO was really our priority 15 years ago. And at this moment, I wish to thank the American people for actually being the U.S. being the driving force of the enlargement of NATO. If you look at that from today's eyes, it might not seem to be such a big deal to admit some other country to NATO. Since then, many other have entered NATO, and many other are so-called, so to say, in the pipeline. But at that time, you have to appreciate that it was just 10 years after the Velvet Revolution, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So just 10 years did these countries change from the Soviet-dominated societies and economies into free market and democratic countries. And at this moment, it might have not been that easy for the lawmakers, the U.S. Senate in particular, because the Senate had to pass the treaty on enlargement of NATO. It might have not been easy to admit the three former post-Soviet countries to an organization where actually veto is the principle of making decisions. So how do you believe, how do you trust these countries that they will actually be loyal to the common principle? Well, I think we at that time had already earned that trust. Of course, as early as 1991, Czechoslovakia, then it was Czechoslovakia before the split, it sent its troops to join the effort in Iraq. And even before that, of course, during the history of our totalitarian regime, the Czechoslovak exiles have always declared where did they stand, and many other historic facts was going to be a very good ally. So again, in 1999 we were admitted to NATO. I think that even after that we have given proof that we were going to become a trustworthy and loyal ally. Today, again, enlargement of NATO may seem to be a little more political. We talk about an important ally to the Western world, and yet a country which is so much jeopardized by a complicated relationship with Russia. So the game is not over. This may seem to be a rather routine thing. Well, time to time to expand NATO, to expand this transatlantic relationship. But I think that when we observe the events in Ukraine, we really have to come to a conclusion that the game, which was really politically pressing, or which was actual 15 years ago when we entered NATO, the game is still here. It's not over yet. The influences of powers have not disappeared. The interests of civilizational circles have not disappeared. So let me conclude with what I said about economic relationship, because security and economy are, of course, two sides of the same coin. Without a robust economy, we cannot pay for our security. We cannot justify expenses for national defense. So let's think how to overcome economic crisis. On both sides of the Atlantic, good signs have already emerged. We've seen economic growth here in the US, and we've heard good news from Europe also. So I think that now it is a time not to talk about crisis anymore, but about future cooperation. And in this respect, again, I'm really convinced that both the US and European Union should no longer think of themselves as competitors, but as allies in the economic sense of the word. And you know that there are not very high tariffs which would actually hinder mutual trade. That's not the case. But over the time, many regulatory obstacles, many certificates that are needed have actually become the obstacle to mutual trade. There are many unnecessary regulations that the businesses have to comply with, that hinder our mutual trade and actually make us less competitive against Asia against Latin America. So why don't we just sit at the table and say, do we really need to have different regulatory systems in the areas of automotive, in areas of maybe even food and health, or if we have different regulatory systems, why don't we just recognize each other's certificates, that it would be much easier to do business mutually. And more than that, if we agree on some standards, we can, with a combined power of the two biggest economies, still can export these standards and these ways of doing business to the other part of the world, rather than being divided and hopefully not ruled in the future. We should unite economically and try to set the standards for the world. It's being debated under the TTIP proposal, the trade tip, and I have to use this opportunity to strongly support that plan of our businesses, which may feel threatened with the removal of the barriers and with the removal of all sorts of regulations, that they should expose themselves to the competition between Europe and the United States, because this is much less of competition that is coming already from China. So this is for my opening remarks, and I would like to encourage you to.
My name's Landon, and you talked a little about Ukraine, and I'm interested in the turmoil there. It seems like there's a lot of political turmoil between people that want to join the European Union and then another side who don't. What's better for the economy and relations, and is Ukraine in the future, soon in the future, going to join the European Union?
Well, I think what was on the table was not the full-pledged membership in the European Union. It was so-called association agreement, which is the first necessary step for fully joining the European Union. By any means, I am convinced that that Ukraine should eventually enter European Union, and that was the first step. Unfortunately, from the side of Ukraine, many necessary reforms have not been introduced. So we see a country that's actually, they have really difficulty to balance, or not balance, I mean to keep their public finances running, and they were in desperate need in some fresh cash from elsewhere. And you know that they actually were testing all sorts of possibilities, where could they get some money from. And unfortunately, I'm saying unfortunately, the European Union wasn't very much prepared to extend any substantial loans. And then yet the big neighbor from the east to Ukraine extended such short-term loan with some conditions, and Ukraine accepted, which a substantial part of the Ukrainian public probably understands as the end of the whole thing. I hope that it is not the end of the whole thing, that there is still an open door to cooperation with the European Union, that there will be some way out of this this violent and unacceptable situation in Ukraine, and eventually both Kiev and Brussels will sit at the table again and find some solution for Ukraine.
Ambassador, very quick question. If you could share views of the people of the Czech Republic vis-a-vis the economic strength of Germany, given the historical relationship between the two countries, whether it's they feel economically threatened or this, that, or the other.
Yeah,
I'm just
well,
curious.
thank you.
First of all, I want to compliment you, your country, on being one of the finest manufacturers of handheld weapons I've ever seen.
Well, okay.
Thank you.
We are quite a traditional manufacturer of weapons, but we always make sure that these weapons are sold to countries that are able to guarantee the righteous use of those. Of course, the United States is one of those countries, and many people use those rifles for hunting and sport. So this is something that we can be rather proud of. And again, I can assure you that the Czech Republic has a very complex system of checks to what extent our defense exports go to the right places. Then Germany. Well, of course, if you look at history, that's not only the Second World War. This is many centuries back that there was quite a tension between German states. Of course, that time it wasn't Germany as we know it, and German emperors and kings and Bohemian lands. Unfortunately, the 20th century has really been such a tragic moment in our mutual relationship that it wasn't easy to reconcile that relationship with our neighbor. And yet, under the communist regime, this wasn't easily possible. Because, of course, the communists used the West Germany as actually the evil neighbor, and never missed any opportunity to work on that underlying animosity. So when the Velvet Revolution came, everything opened up, the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, people debated about things, and President Václav Havel, the leader of our Velvet Revolution, came with an unprecedented move. He said that the Czechs are sorry for what happened during the transfer of the Germans after the war, because you know that after the war the entire German population from within Czechoslovak borders was transferred to Germany. And again, the Czech nation began thinking of this in a completely different perspective. On the other side of the many positive moves towards then Czechoslovakia, a bilateral treaty was signed, a declaration which actually really declared that both countries won't let the past burden our present and future relationship. So these were intense diplomatic and people-to-people activities. I can make another example. Of course, our longest border is now with Germany, and along that border, cooperation between municipalities across border is just flourishing, and this began as early as in early 90s. It means that we all did our best to reconcile that tragic memory of the events of the 20th century. So how is it now? Germany is our best, among our best neighbors and friends. Economically, we are very highly. As a matter of fact, the Czech Republic is a export-based economy. Most of our GDP is actually done by exporting stuff. European Union is far, far our biggest trading partner. Of course, we are part of the European Union, so we can say that's basically intra-European Union trade. But if you look at it from the perspective of foreign trade, Germany represents more than 35, maybe even 40% of our foreign trade. United States, for example, represents 2%. So it means that economically, the relationship between the Czech Republic and Germany is very intense, and very German industries own their subsidiaries in the Czech Republic. So that trade is actually within one family of companies. For instance, if you look at the biggest German investment, Volkswagen bought our automaker Škoda, and they make about 1 million cars a year, which together with other car makers in our country makes the Czech Republic one of the biggest car producers in the world, of course, slash per capita. Of course, you have to look at that from this perspective. But what I'm saying is that Germany is our far biggest trading partner. It's now very close culturally, and also politically. I think that the relationship on every level, the level of the state, regions, as well as local relationships, are really flourishing.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Oh, he was first, and then I'm sorry. You should. I'm sorry.
Hi, Jeff Dolby, political science major. So a lot of the U.S. trading partners seem to not take very good care of their employees, and you have buildings that collapse and kill hundreds, if not thousands, of their workers.
You mean you as we?
Like the U.S. and Latin America or some Asian places. And I'm curious if the Czech Republic has protections for their employees that some of these other countries lack.
That's a question that arises whenever the U.S. debates free trade agreements. Of course, I understand the concerns of labor that a free trade agreement may actually open doors for what can be called labor dumping. In other words, manufacturing things under conditions that would be not acceptable in the United States and are actually lowering the costs and creating thus an fair competition. When talking about the TTIP with the European Union, I think that it is the European Union that should worry, because as you all know, the labor standards in the European Union, and of course the welfare standards as well, are rather higher than there are in the United States. So we in Europe are concerned to what extent our extensive safety, labor security, welfare systems are actually hindering our competitiveness. There are examples. Many member states have introduced a shortened work week, fewer hours. There are many measures that make a job secure from laying off. So in other words, it's difficult to create a job, because once you create a job and hire people, it's really a challenge to lay these people off and so on. So you don't need to worry that with the TTIP, the American market would be jeopardized by any lowered labor standards. And of course, the same applies to building building requirements. I'm not saying that in Europe we have safer code, but on the safe as in the United States. Uh-oh. You pulled too hard.
Yeah, it's too short.
You know which one?
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being with us here. I just wanted to ask you about, first of all, my name is Jimmy Gama. I'm a political science major. And my question to you is, you have emphasized on economics, share trade. You also mentioned about security, but you have not mentioned about human rights records in the Sussex Republic, and then also you have not mentioned issues like corruption. How would you emphasize telling us about these issues based on human rights and then corruption? Understand some of those countries in the EU, they are very corrupt and they are violent and all that. What do you comment on that?
Corruption is a phenomenon that has to be aggressively fight against. Of course, with any transformational process, the danger of such things like corruption and wrongdoing is probably rather bigger than at a time when the economy is just steady and doesn't go through any major transformation, any major transfer of assets or something like that. So you have to appreciate that we actually had to transform our economies from totally 100% state ownership to a market private-owned economy. And this process maybe has invited people who want to take, circumvent the rules, and the rules themselves may not have been in place that would prevent these things. Every experience of such phenomena is somehow untransferable. People have to live through some bad experience in order to avoid those in the future. It is probably quite pessimistic statement, but I'm afraid that many of nations of the transforming part of Europe simply had to go through such a process. It involves public procurement, it involves privatization process, and it also involves financing of political process. Of course, we can get inspiration from study these things and keep introducing. We are trying to find some balance between a requirement to prevent from these things to happen, and on the other hand, not to prevent public procurement or political life from just stopping it all. Because if you introduce too many bureaucratic regulations, you may even kill the idea itself and perhaps allow for even bigger problems to happen. So that is corruption, and I can assure you that our government is fully committed to fighting corruption. And I think that if you read the papers, internet, you see that there are many cases of quite aggressive approach against these things. As far as human rights, I can assure you that the Czech Republic has a great defender of human rights, not only on our own territory, but abroad, particularly in countries where people still live in totalitarian or semi-totalitarian regimes. We have always helped Cuban dissidents in the island outside of Cuba. We have always helped Burmese dissidents. You know that Václav Havel was a friend with Aung San Suu Kyi, and he himself actually proposed her for the Nobel Prize. He might have gotten that for himself in early 90s because he was a real hero to the entire world, but he actually proposed that Aung San Suu Kyi would get the prize because she needed it much more then. So I don't need to assure you of that. Of course, from the ambassador, it definitely may sound a little self-gratifying, and I think that it is better that you observe our deeds than only listen to the ambassador to be saying your words.
Thanks, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Jamal. So, what's your comment about
we have to appreciate the statement, but in the past it won't happen again. As you know, last Friday, President his directive in which he sets some rules, and in other areas he actually proposes that the debate should be moved to the Congress as to what extent there should be some better oversight over spying activities. On the other hand, even we in Europe have to appreciate that you cannot fight terror without these things. You cannot just go and ask these people, are you guys going to bomb us, or when or where are you going to set something terrible to us? You have to infiltrate their network. You have to have ways how to monitor their conversations and catch them even before they can make something terrible. They can do something terrible. So, how to balance these two approaches is always a big challenge. And again, I think we have to appreciate that the U.S. has taken that very seriously, that the debate is not over. It will continue, definitely in the Congress, so we will see.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for speaking to us this morning. I'm Tim Chambliss. I teach here at the University of Utah. My question is with regard to U.S. foreign policy, American political parties, and the view of American leaders in the last 22 years since the end of the Cold War and the emergence of the Czech Republic with independence. Do Czech Republic leaders and the average person in the Czech Republic see American leaders different, Mr. Clinton, Mr. Bush, Mr. Obama, differently with regard to, say, their political party affiliation?
Oh yes, can assure that in the media and among at least interested part of the public, those who are at least interested in things around them, everybody knows very well different American presidents, their political priorities, not only foreign policy priorities, but also domestic issues. You may be surprised to what extent Obamacare has been discussed in our country, because obviously the reform of a health care system is a challenge in every developed country, in every market economy that wants to take care of the social challenges, and at the same time to not to let the sector to grow beyond any means financially. So we follow American politics definitely more closely than you guys follow our own, which is quite understandable, because we all have to admit that still there is a little bit of a difference of sizes.
Please join me in thanking Ambassador Gandalovich for an excellent informative forum.